Hi everyone, thank you very much for stopping by and returning to the old world. Ever since Games Workshop told us that base sizes are changing, with 20mm squares becoming 25mm squares, the community has been constantly asking the question, what base size should I use, and does base size matter? Games Workshop has said it didn't, but I'm not so sure, and this is the reason why. So way back in the mist of time now, Games Workshop told us that base sizes were changing, but it would only matter for a competitive environment. And even ranking up units against each other, if one unit's on a 25 and one's on a 20mm base, the units have to be pretty dash wide in order to make a significant or any real difference when the units collide, assuming that you are maximizing, which is what the rules have always required you to do. However, base size still matters, I think for two fundamental reasons. The first of these is quite simply moving around the tabletop. Now, we don't know how big the table is going to be. Games Workshop haven't told us what their recommended size is yet. Warhammer was always played on a 6x4, but the same was true of Warhammer 40,000, and they've reduced the size of the table for that. However, I think a lot of people are looking at Horus Heresy, which still plays on a 6x4. So if we take the 6x4 foot table as being your standard, if the units are going to have a larger footprint because they're on bigger bases, therefore they must do, it will mean that maneuverability will be a little bit more difficult purely because units will take up more space. So if you've not converted to the new base sizes, and it doesn't matter how you do it, whether it be you rebase, you put them on converters, you're putting them on movement trays, whatever it may be, if units are on the old base sizes, then it will mean they will be easier to maneuver around the tabletop just because they'll take up less space. So why else will it matter? Well, this comes back to the return of template weapons. For quite a while, we didn't know whether template weapons were going to come back, or again, following the more recent games by Games Workshop, we would see stone throwers and the like saying they've got D6 shots or something along those sort of lines. We now know, however, from the Almanac article on the shooting phase that templates are back, and indeed they are also back in relation to certain spells as well. And this is where base size really matters, I think. The smallest of the blast templates that used to be fired was a 3-inch template, and it hit at a different strength for the model directly under the hole in the middle to everything else that was caught in the blast radius. Now, if you've got a 20mm based unit, that 3-inch diameter template will hit far more models than if they're on 25mm. So actually, you're giving yourself a disadvantage by putting models on the older, smaller bases. Enemy war machines, enemy spells are likely to be more effective because they will hit more of your models. Of course, there is that trade-off between the ability to take less damage by being on bigger bases compared to the lack of maneuverability it gives you. That will obviously depend to an extent how populated tables are with terrain and how much maneuvering you need to do to get around things. I have to be honest, I do think that the whole hoo-ha about base sizes has been somewhat overblown, with on some forums and Facebook groups multiple comments per day asking about base sizes or commenting about base sizes, to the extent I think it's largely just to get a bit of a thrill out of winding people up that are getting annoyed by it. The only cautionary tale I would perhaps share, or cautionary piece of advice rather, would be if you're thinking not rebasing older models onto the new size and you want to use converter movement trays, and absolutely go nuts rebasing models. I did it for my Warhammer 40k stuff. It's an absolute pain in the backside things break if you're really not hugely careful. What I would say is make sure that the movement tray or the converter, whatever it is you're using, clearly marks out where one base is supposed to end and where the next one is supposed to start. I think just putting something into a hole with a wide plastic gap to fill the space probably isn't sufficient, because it will lead to arguments about where 25mm or whatever size you're looking at actually ends and where the next one starts. Are two models hit or one model hit? It's always been the downside of templates that you get those sort of arguments, and I know people used to have boards made out of the old movement tray kits because they had the lines on them for 20mm and 25mm, so you could, once you'd established what model had been hit directly by a projectile, you'd put the template onto this grid, and it made it a lot easier to see which models were hit and which ones weren't, because you weren't having to balance things, particularly if there's spears at jaunty angles and stuff like that. So does base size matter? Yes, I think it does. And I think I can understand why Games Workshop said it only really matters in competitive environments, because in most situations I think it's likely the impact of the change will be fairly minimal. But in any given game, I can see that situation arising where suddenly it matters how many casualties the unit's taking, or whether a unit can get through a particular gap between two bits of terrain or two other units, particularly if it's to do with an important charge. So there we have it, my thoughts on why base sizes matter, and why I think to a certain extent the community is still talking about this to a greater, or well, quite a greater extent. If you've enjoyed this video and other ones like it, do please consider subscribing. It is the best way to support the channel, along with just giving a few minutes of your time to let the videos run. Do have a look as well at the fairly now extensive back catalogue of videos I've produced about all things Warhammer Old World. If you're new here, some of those may grab your fancy. All that remains for me to say is thank you once again for listening. I am Return to the Old World. Have a great day.